All right. Good evening, Facebook Live people. I have no idea if this will work, Facebook Live. It seldom does, but I keep trying. I don't know why. You're welcome to join us on Zoom. Zoom people, please help me to remember to tell them that every 7 or 8 minutes so that as they're listening for a little while, they can jump in on Zoom. But we'd love to have you. Mary, nice to see you. Lisa, nice to see you. And the other dozen plus people, great to have all of you. We're doing something new today, but let's pray to start off. Father, thank you very much for, again, the privilege of coming here and hanging out with friends and some that I don't know yet. I pray that we would become a group that knows each other, but more importantly, that we know this Bible that you've given us, and more importantly that maybe through it, we will be able to see Jesus more clearly. We're grateful for time you give us, for minds, intellects, and for the Spirit to guide us. I ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so here's what we're doing. Casey, nice to see you. Ellen, nice to see you. Not see you, but see black spaces there. And everybody else. I want to, especially in the beginning, because we got some new people, because we're doing a new series. I figured we'd get a couple new people. Like to give a couple little caveats to remind you what we're doing. This group has been going on for a while. Thank you, Mary. You can keep eating your nachos. That's great. This group's been going on for a couple years now, I guess. I don't even know, Travis. But
a couple years sounds good.
Yep, not that long, but a couple years. And the group started kind of as a desire to think a little bit more deeply than what we're going to get traditionally in a Sunday school class, and to flirt with the borders, the boundaries, to be a little outside the box, and then to keep ourselves in the box. It's for Christians, mainly. I can't imagine anybody else would want to know that kind of this stuff, but it might. But there's so many different perspectives on here, and we want that to continue. We want to think outside the box, and you can for sure think we're going to be thinking outside the box when we're dealing with the book of Revelation. But because I have invited my new church into this, and I have never invited them in before, I'm going to probably try to tone it down a little bit for at least a few weeks. I'm going to try to stay nice and borderline. And if you ask any really weird questions, I will just say, Dr. Dalrymple, what do you think? And then I'll just, tell him he's a heretic or something like that. And you'll know, actually, I probably agree with him because I'd be stupid not to. So he's on here as well. You might see he's an apocalypse scholar, a Johannine scholar, and he spent a lot of time in Revelation, more than most, it seems. So, and he's teaching his own class, by the way. He teaches it, I think, tomorrow. I think on Wednesday nights he's teaching. So if you get bored here, jump on his determinedtruth.com and you can find out stuff there. Yeah. So anything else I need to make clear? Invite your friends. Anybody can come. What do you say, Travis?
A lot of us are friends and give each other a hard time. Don't read too much into it. Like, we're not actually picking on we're picking on each other, but in good fun.
We're not actually heretics. I mean,
there's also Josh Patterson and I are the local resident heretics of the group. So the real crazy stuff will turn over to us. No.
Yeah, they're right about that. They are kind of more heretical than most of us. But yeah, I think everybody on here right now, I don't know who everyone is, but I'm guessing I probably have met all of you and know all of you. So in some place I've connected with you. But there'll probably be people on here that haven't. But yeah, some of us are very close and give each other a really hard time. Just know that we're family and we're just having fun together. And hopefully we'll keep doing that. Feel free to talk, to ask questions. You know how Zoom works though, right? It's a pain in the rear to talk over something, but just try. I mean, we know what we're dealing with. Do it anytime you want. So, all right, thanks, Rob. That was cool. Yeah, I'll be a call out there. So let's jump in. We're doing the apocalypse today. We're not going to get very far into it, but I am determined to at least read a few verses in it in order to jump off of that and then give some basic background information that probably half of you have heard before, but won't hurt as to have a review. And then we'll get into more revelation, and then we'll get into the book itself, big picture, as big pictures I can keep it. So I'm going to read an intro paragraph or so here from a book that I read just this last week that is not out on the market yet. So you were the first ones to hear this. I'm just going to read this little paragraph. It says, the book of Revelation is a narrative in which the redemption of the nations and the arrival of the new creation are accomplished through the faithful, loving, and sacrificial lives of God's people. I am hoping, he says, the book of Revelation, that he's going to show this, that it carries forward the story of Jesus. Once the climax of the story is reached in the last couple chapters, the nations have been redeemed and the new creation has come. He says the questions of when will his kingdom come in all its fullness and how are the nations redeemed are answered in the narrative pages of the book of Revelation with, as soon as the faithful, loving, and sacrificial witness of God's people is finished. So when is all this going to happen? When is all this, how long, O Lord? Well, the answer is as soon as the faithful, loving, and sacrificial witness of God's people is finished. That's what the story is about. Okay, it's about this great grand love story about the sacrifice of God's people and the sacrifice of God's true human, which is going to lead to the sacrifice of God's true humanity. We'll get into all of that stuff. So I'm just going to read it. I'm going to read all of Revelation right now. I'm going to read 4 verses, just 4 verses. If you got a Bible, take a look, and then we'll start. We'll jump in a little bit different place. So it starts off with this. The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show to his servants what must soon take place. And he made it known by sending his angel to his servant John, who bore witness to the word of God and to the testimony of Jesus Christ, even to all that he saw. Blessed is he who reads aloud the words of the prophecy, and blessed are those who hear and who keep what is written therein, for the time is near. All right, so here are the words. Go ahead and throw out some key words from those 4 verses that you saw. Give me a half a dozen or a dozen words that you saw that we've got to talk about at some point.
Bless.
Soon. That was one of them. All right. Shows that it must soon take place. All right.
Vision,
What?
vision, the vision,
Vision. Okay. Okay.
Testimony,
Testimony. All right.
a witness, to the
Witness.
word.
Good. Okay.
prophecy,
Prophecy. That's a good one. I'm going to go ahead and assume that you're all just ignoring this one.
Blessed,
What? Revelation.
Jesus Christ,
Jesus Christ. That's a pretty significant one.
Hear and keep,
Which one?
hear and keep.
Oh, good. Here. And I don't know if C is good. It shows up. Does C show up in this one here? It's gonna show up. Keep.
that was C.
See, good. Any others?
Blessed,
Blessed. Yep, for sure. Angel. Blessed.
how about allowed?
Oh. All right. So
One more, servant.
servant. Okay. Does it name the servant?
John. Jesus,
We got that one. We nailed that halfway through. Good job. All right. So now if we're going to do an in-depth study, we need to know what probably all of these words mean, right? We got to really look at this. And there's commentaries that will give you this stuff, or between 6 or 7 commentaries, you're going to get something on all of this. You're going to find out that each word, you're going to find out in the Greek, martyr, it's, the word martyr. You're going to find out what soon means. You're going to find out what prophecy, what revelation, all these things. We can't do each one individually, but I want us to look at a big picture. Okay, so I want us to get a few of these, because some of these, these kinds of things are going to tell us a lot about what this particular genre is. Okay, so we can't really do much until we deal with genre, but I'm gonna back up, so we're putting on the rewind. Okay, we're going backwards. Okay, I want to hear from you. When you hear about the book of Revelation, what do you think of? What are the words that pop into your head? Probably not these. Well, I'm sure the word revelation, maybe prophecy, but other things. Do you think about
Eschatology.
eschatology, or the study of the last things? Okay,
Dragon,
what was that?
dragon. Isn't there a dragon?
Dragon. Sorry, yeah, it's hard. Yeah, there's other conversations happening, so it's hard to hear. Dragon. Okay, I'll just write it here. Dragon. Because that's cool. Like, of course, you're gonna think of a dragon, right? Eschatology. You guys can't read these, can you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A little bit? Okay, good. All right, what else?
Confusion.
Confusion. All right, nice. It is a chaotic book, or it is at first glance anyway, for sure. Other things? Nobody else thinks about, like,
I think of like Daniel, Ezekiel.
okay,
The beast.
Daniel, Ezekiel, a beast.
Oh,
Actually, there's two beasts.
The tribulation.
Tribulation, good.
I think of dispensationalism.
Okay, dispensational. Whew.
rapture.
Rapture, yes. Yes, that's a big word that doesn't show up, but yeah.
Right, but people think about it.
Uh-huh.
Rebecca said
Bad
horses
word.
and horsemen.
Wait, what was the other one? Sorry.
Rebecca said horses and horsemen in the chat.
Oh, yeah, horses. There's a four, right? The riders of the apocalypse, the four horsemen of the
Horns.
apocalypse. Yeah, what?
Horns.
Horns, Horns. Yes,
Blood.
10 horns and on the 10 horns, yeah, etc.
Blood.
Devastation poured out on the world.
Oh, okay, yeah, like, which is the tribulation, yeah,
Yeah.
poured out,
The Antichrist.
moles. Antichrist. Yeah, that's what I was expecting more of. Antichrist, rapture, beasts, dragon, tribulation, yeah.
Jace, I like the no more tears, no more crying.
Oh,
That's
nice.
my part.
Yeah,
I like the
Tears.
best.
Yep, no more tears. So back up to the very last couple of chapters of Revelation, where you get that beautiful vision, yeah.
Judgment.
Judgment, yeah, so no more tears and also judgment. Some people call it the Great White Throne, the judgment. That's how people remember it, but judgment is probably a better overarching thing, yeah. Right, any other weird things?
Lot.
666. Fits with all that stuff. Nobody's talked about the lamb. It's pretty important.
How about the churches?
Churches, yeah. I mean, we've got 2 chapters totally devoted to the churches. I mean, the whole book is devoted to the churches, but it tells you about each church individually. What we should know about that. And there's a whole lot there. Like, why are there 7 churches? Are there only 7 churches? What does this have to do with anything? Why? What churches are they that he's writing to? Okay, so we've got some big picture ideas here. All right, so now let's jump back to this. This is where I wanted to start with, so I just jump back in here. Okay, let's jump back to this, to the genre question. All of these things answer genre kinds of questions, right? So let's think about genre for just a second. So here's your little hermeneutics class. For those of you who haven't been in any of my hermeneutics classes in the past, that's what we'll kind of start with. You can't, what I want to do is keep you from being afraid of this book. And so I want to teach you a little bit about genre in the beginning, then I want to teach you about the specific kind of genre that we're dealing with here. So you know what genre is, right? We're asking questions like, how should we understand the rich man and Lazarus? For instance, like what's that genre? Is that teaching us something about hell, Hades, this in-between place, Abraham in the bosom? Is this theology we're supposed to take? What's the genre of this? That helps us understand how we're supposed to learn from that, right? So when Paul says to someone, to women, that they shouldn't braid their hair, what's the genre there? Is it helpful for us to know the genre? Is it helpful for us to know the next step, the context of that particular genre? Does that tell us anything? Is that statement relative or absolute? Some of you have braided hair, maybe, I don't know, I can't tell, but you've probably braided it before. Is that allowed? Is the moon really going to turn to blood? Okay, we're going to move into the apocalyptic genre. It talks about the moon turning to blood and the sun being blotted out. Okay, is that something that we should expect to happen as if it's history? Or is that something that is a metaphor for what's going on? So these are the genre kinds of questions. Or the book of Thessalonians talks about certain people being left behind. You may have heard about that incredibly fascinating, wonderful literary tale, Left Behind, which I'm going to show you is completely ridiculous throughout that book. Anybody read Left Behind, the series? Yeah, I mean, of course, lots of people did. It's not. So I'm going to show you, and I think that's probably not quite the direction we should be going when we're reading the book of Revelation. So folly is asking, folly. Genre is asking some of these questions. It's going to ask questions like, should a fool be answered according to their folly, or should we be ignoring them? Okay, that's a proverb. How do we understand proverbs? Do snakes and donkeys talk? Okay, that's Genesis and the Balaam story. What do we do with that? Is that a genre question? Should we take it as history or not? So all of this is what we call hermeneutics. Okay, you do it naturally all the time. Every day you are probably doing some sort of hermeneutics without knowing it. That is, you're doing some sort of interpreting. Okay, you might not be reading a story in a Bible. You might skip your devotional time that day or whatever, but you're probably interpreting something. You're interpreting a newspaper article, a quick move on your CNN top 5 news reports. As you're scrolling through, you're interpreting what your spouse has to say about something, right? And some of you are very poorly interpreting what your spouse has to say about something, and it's causing great friction in your house even right now, and you're upset with me for bringing it up, right? So this is all about interpretation, how we're going to interpret certain things. So when I teach the larger class on hermeneutics, which we went through last year, we talked about words and how they have meaning in themselves, and then they have meanings within a phrase, then within a sentence, then within a paragraph, then within a pericope, then within a chapter maybe, and then within a book or even a section of a book, and then a book, and then a corpus, like like Pentateuch as a corpus, or wisdom literature, something like that, and then as a testament, and then as a Bible, and then as like special versus general revelation. Like it keeps getting bigger. So if I say something like the word trunk, I use this as an example often, trunk, you could give me 4 or 5 different definitions of the word trunk, right? A trunk is the back of your car. It's something you put old heirlooms in, blankets and stuff for the future. It's an elephant's nose. It's something you swim in, swimming trunks. It's a tree that up leaves. It's the trunk, right? I think I just named 5 different things. But then it's in context. You can find out more about it. So that definition means nothing unless it's in context with something. Genre helps give us context. It helps us say, hey, don't read it like this. So if I were to say to you, a fox began speaking to a crow, you would immediately interpret this genre a certain way, and it would not be as a historical fact. If I said something like, let's see, how do you start fairy tales?
Once upon a time.
Once upon a time, right? Anytime you see the words once upon a time, you know right from the beginning, not history. Even though no one's told you that it's not history, you just know because there's what we call a genre marker, something that tells you about this thing. So that's one major piece of context, right? Words, sentences, trying to get that kind of thing. There's other context. There's ancient Near Eastern context. There's Greco-Roman culture. That's part of your context. All of these things are going to help us as we interpret this particular book. We're going to ask questions as we go through here, like, is this a relative statement or an absolute statement? Okay, does it stand for all time in a particular way, or is it relative to those particular people? We're going to ask, is this a very clear answer? I love it when people say, the Bible clearly says, right? It almost never clearly says anything. Okay, it only says it clearly once you really understand the context of the ancient Near East, Second Temple culture, Greco-Roman, all those things have to come in order for you to be able to understand it clearly. And even then, it's not clear, right? Remember, someone's already been doing your interpretation for you if you're reading it in English. So anybody who says, I can just interpret on my own, you can't. You simply can't unless you know, in this particular book, unless you know Greek. But it's bigger than Greek. It's also knowing the Old Testament. It's also knowing Greco-Roman. And I'm going to give you a list of things that we need to talk about. This is just big picture. So, yeah, so let's jump specifically to Revelation. You got the idea, big picture, genre, and how it works. So Revelation is just another word for the word apocalypse, right? So some of your Bibles might even say the apocalypse of St. John, or something like that. And when we think of apocalypses, what do you think of? When I say the word apocalypse, what comes to mind?
End of the world.
The end of the world. Any particular specific things about the end of the world that come to mind when you hear it?
Armageddon.
Armageddon. Oh yeah, okay, good. Yeah.
War, battles.
Wars and battles, yeah. Yep.
The blood.
Zombies.
Zombies, yeah. That's what I was looking for. I know
That's
you're
all I
laughing.
hear these zombies.
And that's what we're in, right? In fact, the picture that I used on the Facebook thing, I think had it was a red, like, I think it had zombies maybe in the background, or it was from a movie set or something like that. Like, that's what we think of when we think of apocalypse, right? We love that. We're just fascinated. Sorry, we're fascinated with post-apocalyptic, once the end of the world has happened, now we live here. Book of Eli kinds of stuff, or Walking Dead, right? What happens after all of that's happened? After the sun has been blotted out, after the moon is turned to blood, after the mark of the beast has been taken, after the barcode that's been put on our hands or on our foreheads, or whatever has been put into the COVID vaccine. After all that has happened, right? You've heard all this stuff. Yeah? You've at least
Yes.
heard it going through there, whether you agree with it or not. You've heard about it. You've read Tim LaHaye. You've read Hal Lindsey maybe in the past. You've read, I don't know, Pat Robertson's New World Order, something like that, that tells you what Revelation says and how it applies specifically to you. Okay, all that stuff is in your head when you go into this book, which is probably not helpful to you. It's almost like we're going to have to unlearn some things in order to learn some things. So I hope you're going into this fresh. So apocalypses have a particular genre. Revelation is not the only one that is this genre. Now we saw in here, there's a prophecy, right? Revelation chapter 1, verse 3 or 4, something says that it's a prophecy, some kind. So we got to ask 3. Thank you. We've got to ask questions about what does it mean for it to be a prophecy? So it also seems to be a letter, right? It's written to the churches. It's a letter. So those are 2 different genres, prophecy and letter, or epistle. But prophecies can be in a letter. It can be in letter form. So it's possible that prophecy could also be in a letter. That happens in other things. Prophecies are often in poems. Sometimes they're in narratives. A lot of people see apocalyptic, let me write that word up here. apocalyptic as coming out of prophecy. That is, prophecy is the big umbrella word. And then apocalyptic is one of the nuances of prophecy underneath it. Okay, and that's fine. I'm not persuaded that's right exactly. And I think even when we do that, it's because we're misunderstanding what prophecy is to begin with. And I could do a long conversation on what prophecy is, but I'm going to keep it really short. In fact, I don't know if I'm sure that Rob he's probably not even on here anymore. Oh, yes. But he and I he's probably done tons of these, but he and I did this prophecy seminar that was a few days, and we had a few great speakers talk about Revelation some 10 plus years ago. And my job was to talk about prophecy and how it leads into apocalyptic, maybe. But here's all I want you to know about that, okay? Prophecy is not some predicted thing about the future. It's the foretelling of what God has already said. Okay, so even in the Old Testament, I don't want you to think about God somehow bringing this new information into the prophet and the prophet going out and saying, here's information I got from God, everybody listen. Although that does happen sometimes. But the literature that we have written out is almost always based on something that God has already said, usually in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy has a list of stipulations, things you must do. And if you don't do, here's what happens to you. And if you do, here's what happens to you. Okay. And the prophet's job was to read that and interpret it for their time. Okay, you remember how God said, if you do this, then this happens. And if you don't do this, then this doesn't happen. Well, you know the Assyrians, you know the Babylonians, you know the Canaanites, you know the whatever people, they're going to come in and wipe out our land. So whoever the big bad guys are at the time. Right, that's the prophecy, because that's what Deuteronomy's already said. Or the green little bugs are going to come and eat all of our stuff, or there's going to be hail, something like that. Okay, it's not a prophecy, it's something that's going to happen. It's an idea that automatically happens when you live not according to God. Okay, so that's prophecy, is this foretelling of something. Okay, so I would say rather that apocalyptic, I promise all this is going to start to make sense. I'm kind of trying to bring it together in this thing, but I would say apocalyptic is probably supposed to be umbrellaed by wisdom. So wisdom is the big thing, and apocalyptic is one of the smaller things. I think also law is one of the smaller things. Law, apocalyptic, Proverbs, of course, is going to be under wisdom, things like that. But I think there's a lot in this book that if we see it as a wisdom book and not as a prophecy, like predicting the future, we will be greatly helped. That it's leading to wisdom for God's people in their particular circumstances. All right, and I'm not alone in that. Von Rad said that a million years ago. So I'm going to read this. This is J.J. Collins. He says this: Apocalypse is a genre of revelatory literature with a narrative framework in which a revelation is mediated by another worldly being to a human recipient, disclosing a transcendent reality which is both temporal, time, insofar as it envisages eschatological salvation, and spatial, insofar as it involves another supernatural world.
Could you read that again?
Yes. Okay. Apocalypse is a revelatory piece of literature. The genre is revelation. It's revealing something to you in a narrative framework. So a storyline. It's giving you a story. And it's mediated by something other than a human recipient. So we'll talk about that in my list of things. Okay. For instance, angel. Okay. Somebody else is going to mediate this information, or God, right? Depending on how it's coming, or angel as God, or God as angel as ambassador of God. So therefore angel is God in some sense. Disclosing a transcendent reality. Okay. So something above us, transcendent, bigger, which is temporal and spatial. Okay, so it's dealing in time and space. It's going to be dealing with both of those things. It's temporal in that it's talking about eschatological salvation, or the end times, how God is going to save us in the end times, we'll talk often about the word end times. Okay, but let me just clarify right from the very beginning. When I say end times, I am not talking about some time that is yet to come. Okay, I do think Revelation is talking about a time that is yet to come. I also think it's talking about times that have already come. And I think that's very important. This is a story that is very large, thousands of years, and not just thousands of years in the future. So when Paul says end time, he means this new time that Jesus has introduced. So when people say, are we in the last days? Are we in the end times? My answer is always absolutely yes. We are. Like, oh my goodness, does that mean the tribulation is here? Yes, it's already here. But when's the millennium? We're already in. Okay, all that stuff. We'll get to all of that stuff. So don't be scared. But you're already in all of these things. They're already taking place, and they have been for hundreds and hundreds of years. Okay, so Hellholm adds this to the Collins quote I just said. He said, it's intended for a group in crisis with the purpose of exhortation and or consolation by means of divine authority. So think of this as wisdom crisis literature. People are hurting. They're going through something, and he is giving them encouragement and wisdom, or urging, saying, hey, think about it like this, do this. Okay, it's exhortation literature, it's wisdom literature, it's crisis literature. So we don't go through a lot of crises, certainly not like them. But you can imagine 21 years ago, right, when our last big national tragedy happened that we always remember, just this week, right? That if something was written, that has a very specific context. And if you're reading that 100 years later, you don't really understand. That was written the day this happened, or the month, or the year, or whatever happened. That context of tragedy, of the towers falling, of this attack on our own soil, etc., resonates. It's changed all of our thinking about everything. So we're writing things, but people in the future don't know that. So we got to go back and remember what they're going through. All right. So what is apocalyptic? What does the actual word apocalyptic means? It means just revealed or unveiled. Something was covered, and now it's ta-da! Okay, you now see it. Something on your eyes that have fallen off. Scales have fallen off, so now you can see. Or the curtain has been thinned, as the Irish say. Or what I like to talk about is the scrim has shown the light on it. Okay, someone can now see through the back of the stage, and they can see into the background of what's happening. And it happens all the time. It's not just in the book of Revelation. This idea of unveiling, it happens in other places. Jesus reveals or unveils different things. But this book is called the revealing or the unveiling. It's like when Isaiah is transferred into that world, right? Where all of a sudden he can see into this throne room. Okay, now what was covered is now made, you can now see it. Okay, it's when people are able to see the bottom parts of God as he enters into our world, like the throne and the chariots and all that stuff in the book of Ezekiel. And the rest of him is up in his world.
Like the mystery of the gospel that was hidden before, but is now revealed to us.
That's right. It's now, your eyes are now open. That's right, exactly. Even Paul speaks of his eyes being unveiled, right? On the road to Damascus, his eyes were opened to seeing truth, who Jesus was. So that's what apocalyptic means. It's not all this scary stuff. It doesn't mean end of the world. It just means, okay, I'm going to open your eyes now. You ready? Let me show you something. Ding. Okay, it doesn't mean end of the world. So you don't have to think about it like that. I know it's become that, but it's not really. So that's already something kind of important as you go into this. It's not about the end of the world. It's about helping you to see into another world or see something that is real beyond what we're seeing. There's something extra going on. And Revelation is not the only apocalyptic book. This one's called the Apocalypse. The other ones aren't called the Apocalypse, but actually there are other books called the Apocalypse that other than this one. And there's a lot of books that are apocalyptic genres that don't have the name apocalypse in it. But you can find the apocalypse of Stephen and the apocalypse of Thomas, the apocalypse of.
Going back on over here.
Say again? Oh, Brad doesn't have his off yet. Or the apocalypse of, who did I say? Gallius. You've got, let's see, who I have. First and second apocalypse of James are texts that you can read.
Canonized scripture.
Canonized scripture, that's a little different, but we do have some apocalyptic genres in scripture. Like Daniel, a lot of people would say is apocalyptic. Okay, and we'll define it a little bit more as we go, but something that's opening the eyes, but it's also something that happens during a certain range of time. People that are in crisis going through a particular thing. Other ones like Ezekiel. Remember, Ezekiel is grabbed by the hair and transported into another world. It's the coolest story ever. Like, really? You're grabbed by the hair and carried somewhere? Like, how do these things happen? It's such a fun vision of what it is that is happening there. That's where he's going to see the cherubim and the moving thrones and all of those things. Joel has a lot of apocalypse in it. Pieces of Zechariah have it. Of course, the book of Revelation has it. Mark 13 is apocalyptic. I'm guessing Dr. Dalrymple would agree. Matthew 24, the Olivet Discourse, has apocalyptic parts in it. 2 Thessalonians 2. So there's something that's being revealed that's like Jesus saying, okay, here's something extra, something, but it's usually about something that's coming, like an end to something in some way. All right, that's when we talk about the genre. So the word just means unveiling, but when we talk about the genre, it usually has something to do with this end time, something that's coming later. Let's see, I don't think there's any. Pseudo-Methodius I wrote, the Coptic apocalypse of Paul, the Gnostic apocalypse of Peter, the regular apocalypse of Peter. All right, but there's a lot out there. Okay, so whenever you ever think, okay, Revelation is the apocalypse, just remember that there's at least a dozen others that I was quickly able to grab hold of that you can read. Okay, so these are a couple things you need to know about apocalypse. All right, questions so far? About stuff I said, not about the future stuff I'm going to say.
Could apocalypse stuff be like where the New Testament writers pull meaning from the Old Testament, even if it doesn't address like crisis stuff?
Yes. Yep. So there's a genre thing. I'm going to list a bunch of things that are generally to be included in this kind of stuff. But yes, for sure, it's not going to always be in crisis. But remember that the Bible is generally written to a group of people in crisis.
Yeah.
Right? It's not usually written to the powerhouse, to the people who are winning. It's the people who are oppressed and hurt. So, and they've been in crisis, like they're always in crisis, it seems like. But there are certainly more crisis moments than others, right? David is in charge of a pretty large empire. That's not fair. Kingdom, pretty large kingdom, and not in crisis for sometimes. But when Babylon takes them away, or Assyria takes them away, then they're in larger crisis. All right, so here's what I said and all that stuff. I've just tried to say so far, here's what apocalyptic the word means. That was my first point. My second point is, here's a bunch of other apocalyptic books. Okay, just so you know, you're not alone dealing with the book of Revelation. The third thing I want to say is something that De Silva said, which I liked. He said, I don't want you to be afraid of this book. All right, I want to say two things here. I want to say, be afraid and don't be afraid. I want to try and hit both of these sides, because we are called to fear the Lord. This book is going to bring that out. The fear of the Lord that you hear about in Proverbs, you hear about all the way through Exodus, right? We're going to be called to fear the Lord in this. And that's what Revelation is going to be about. And it's a book about beauty and lamb conquering and war and all these things, which we'll explain, or at least delve into a little bit. But And so it's beautiful, and so it should bring about worship for us, right? Right from the beginning, holy, holy, holy. Like, where do we get that song? Okay, well, Isaiah maybe, but also Revelation, right? Because Revelation, like you said, Lisa, is grabbing hold of these Old Testament things. Okay, so holy, 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 or hallelujah, right? Again, in Revelation, and those Messiah kind of stuff, or worthy is the Lamb that was slain, like all these things, these ideas of worth and holiness. I want you to fear God in this book. I don't want you to be afraid of what the content is. Like, it's saying something that would make you like be afraid of the dragon, or be afraid, like, I can't possibly understand what's happening in this book. Okay, it's actually not, I mean, even if you don't have all that other stuff clouding, all the stuff that you thought about in the beginning, you know, there's left behind and stuff that's messing you up. If you didn't have that stuff, this book reads, you can see the narrative story. You can see what's happening. Okay, and it's a little weird because there's some things that kind of that cycle. They go through what we call recapitulating. They're kind of telling the story over again, but they're moving forward a little bit. We'll talk about, and so it's hard to figure out the structure. Is it moving chronologically? Is it going backwards? So it is weird. I understand. Hi, Ellie. I understand how it would be a little bit fearful, a little bit strange. There's wacky things, but there's enough low-hanging fruit here that we'll be able to grab and see the big picture. That when you leave this in 25 weeks or whatever it is, you'll be like, I think I get it. Like, I feel like I know what's happening here. And maybe I haven't figured out, maybe I'm not convinced that Jace was right about what he said about 666, or what these 10 horns meant, or what these 7 spirits are. Like, those kinds of details, you can still see the big picture. So I want you to be afraid, but I don't want you to be afraid. That's the third thing I want to say. Fourth thing I want to say is listen to the ancient readers. Okay, that's really important. I want you to hear, we won't talk about rhetorical criticism, like implied readers and implied listeners and stuff like that. But I just want you to think like them. I want you to remember that they're a completely different group. And if we wrote something, like if you wrote something now and someone 2,000 years later comes along, they're going to need some help. That's not strange. It's not only the book of Revelation, it's the book of John, the book of Mark, which is a pretty easy gospel, I think, but also phenomenal. Like, there's so much beauty that comes alive if you know a little bit more, if you read like an ancient reader. And the Revelation is written not to you. It's written for you. It'll be very helpful, but it's not written to you. Okay. And it's not designed to tell you, we'll talk more about this too. I keep throwing little things in, but I want to talk about more when we get to them. But thank you. 30 minutes. Got it. All right. It's not written to tell you what your future is. Most of it's actually written to tell you what your past is, what your story was, and how you're connected with it now is an application that we're going to get, hopefully, by reading these things. So it's not written to you, it's written for you. And if you start reading the book of Revelation to try and figure out what's going to happen in the year 2026, right, or the year 3000, you are missing the point of the book. I really want you to see what it was telling them at their time. Most of those things that it was telling them to think about are long past. And yet they're still going to be relevant. Very much so. So we'll get there. All right, so that's number 4. Be humble. The Revelation is not written for, it's not written to us, but for us. I should probably say this, by the way, too, which I never said, but I always probably should. Where's the word revelation? It's revelation. There's no letter here. Okay? This is not the book of Revelations. So I don't care what you learn from me, but never again will you say the word revelations anywhere. If you've said it today, I didn't hear you. It's okay. Josh, what?
The Revelation will not be televised.
Yeah, that's right. It will not be televised. Yes. So just don't say revelations. It's the revelation of Jesus Christ. It's here's what he's revealing. This is the book, the apocalypse, not the apocalypses, not the many unveilings. Sure, there's lots of mysteries in here. Sure, there's lots of things that he's telling us, but it's one story that he's giving us. Okay, that's not one of my points, but you can make it number 5 if you want. So here's number 5, and we talked about it already, but I'm gonna say a little bit more. The symbols that you're gonna read in here that scare a lot of you all come, that's not fair, mostly come from the Old Testament and, well, no, I think it's probably fair to say both of these two things, from the Old Testament and from Greco-Roman culture. Okay, they are not coming from the year 4000 AD. All right, these are not written on a computer disk or anything like that. Hologram, these are, all of the symbols are going to be Old Testament or ancient Near East, right, and Greco-Roman culture. So we can find the answers to these things. Because remember, Revelation isn't written to you. It's not written for you to look towards the future, although there is a lot of future, I think anyway, in there, and it will help you in your future, but that's not what it is. We can figure out what the symbols are. So if you start trying to figure out if Ronald Wilson Reagan is 666 because he has 6 in each one of those things, or if you think it's Gorbachev because you grew up in the 80s and it was, those are the bad guys, or right now you think it's, I don't know, Biden or Obama, or I don't know, it's got to, I've used conservatives and liberals in there, yeah. Then you're missing the point. We can go back and figure out what the symbols mean. If we just live in their culture, they're not hard.
Professor Broadhurst, is it fair to say that John had access to a symbols gospel? Is that fair?
Symbols gospel?
Like the Q document, how like is there a symbols gosh, my phone's acting gospel? I've heard scholars talk about the symbols gospel. I mean, is this felonious or?
That's interesting. I'm sure that scholars talk about that. I haven't heard about that as an actual source of something, but even Q is probably not an actual source. It's a theoretical idea, right? So Josh is talking about Q is it's called a source, and it's the source that the synoptic gospels, that is Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Matthew and Luke copied from Mark and somebody else. And we call that Q, but it's just a theory, right? It's just an idea out there. So that there's an idea, like a list of symbols. I wouldn't say that I think it's clear there's probably not a book of symbols, but the cultural air is, we gonna call that a book or a scroll of symbols. Yeah, like they would know it. They would know the symbols in the same way that you know common symbols today. You know things like we have an agreement on how we talk today in the cultural river that we're in. We all have this agreement that we talk a certain way. And when I say a weird word, you say, whoa, help me out, right? Because you have to understand what I'm saying in order to get there. So they would have understood a lot of these symbols. Some of these symbols are supposed to be a little bit puzzling, I think. Okay, it's kind of a coded language, but I don't mean that it's a coded language like you can figure out if you read the 7th letter and then the 7th letter and then the 7th letter that you're going to find out that George W. Bush is whatever, right? I don't mean it's coded in that way, but I mean that it has symbols in it, and you're supposed to know the symbols. And I think most readers at that time would have known these symbols because they lived in the Greco-Roman culture and they were avid readers of what we call the Old Testament. They would have known this, probably maybe not readers, but knowers. Most people aren't even literate, probably, but they would have known these stories. They would have known Ezekiel. They would know what the cherubim were. They would know Isaiah. They would know Exodus. They would know Daniel. So when they hear some of these things, they catch on pretty quickly. When a beast comes up out of the sea, they go, oh, when do I remember? I remember there being a beast in the Old Testament. What's that talking about? And they catch on to this point, right? So they would know this. Does that answer kind of? Not really answer, but
Yeah, and I was thinking like, I would add like 12 as the number for God's chosen people. So like 12,000 from the 12 tribes equals 144,000. That doesn't literally mean only 144,000 people. It's like it's a symbol.
Good, yep. So while they don't have like a legend where they go look up 144 equals this, they know 12 and 12, right? They know 12 is a number that is very heavily used in the Old Testament. They know what 7 means. They know what 40 means, right? They get those things. And we'll talk about each one of those things. Here's my point though. They come from the Old Testament, they come from Greco-Roman culture, and the original audience would understand. So here's how I would say this. Revelation is a book that seeks to interpret, not to be interpreted. Okay? It's trying, not fully, but I'm just trying to give you a little quick, snappy sagacity, just a little piece there that would help you. It's about interpreting the Torah or Old Testament in general, Tanakh, all of it. It's taking those things and it's saying, it's applying it to a new age. So it's interpreting. It doesn't need to be interpreted by 2,000 years later, people. Of course it does, because we don't know what it means, but that's not its intention. Right? The author of this book is not thinking 2,000 years later, some people are going to try and understand this. And then they'll finally understand that this is helicopters, and this is the Persian Gulf War, and then they'll finally understand all that. No, that's not what's going on. He's got a very specific meaning that they would be able to pick up on. So, speaking of these references, John sees this bloody lamb in one of these things, and you should know that when you talk about a bloody lamb, okay, you know this probably, but they surely knew this, that's going to lead to some kind of sacrifices language. Sacrifices. We know all about sacrifices in the ancient Near East. The blood on the door frames, all the way back to Genesis, Isaac, and Abraham, and all the way to Noah, right? That these sacrifices took place. So that's what I mean. We're going back, and they'd be able to remember that there are certain contexts, there's certain stories there. They would know that when the beasts come out of the sea, Daniel saw beasts come up out of the sea. Okay, so they know that that's what's happening. And if you know your Old Testament, you would know that the sea is symbolic of certain things. It's symbolic of chaos and a disorder is probably the best way of saying that, right? It's untamable. It's darkness. It's this disaster. Dry land is the safer place to be. So you would know that man's job is to care for the beasts, not to be conquered by the beasts, right? These are just narratives that would just immediately flow into your head. Adam was supposed to subdue the beast in the garden. One deceived him. So Adam was made subhuman. All this stuff. And then they think about, oh, Daniel was also about Nebuchadnezzar becoming subhuman and becoming a beast. These things would be flowing into their minds, even if they're not flowing into yours right away. A new Adam has to come and defeat a beast, a different beast. A dragon even has to defeat this dragon, and hence a lamb who was slain to defeat the dragon in the book of Revelation, right? They're going to see those symbols. You're trying to work out, dragon, is there really a dragon? Right? Are dragons exist? Did dragons ever exist? They know the symbols. They're connecting to those things. So 666, you're figuring all that stuff out. They know that it refers to Nero Caesar, right? To this particular Caesar, at least that's what I think that refers to. They would get that pretty quickly. They would know that the mark of the beast isn't something that you take like literally on your forehead or on your hand, or a COVID vaccine or something like that. They would understand what the mark of Christ or the mark of God was, to be marked out. They would know what that means. They're not doing any of this fancy stuff. It's not barcodes on your hand. That's not what they're thinking about. They know what it means ahead of time. They know that not to overdo the symbols either. Okay, we can get too lost in all the symbols and miss the larger point. So I'm going to try and keep us much closer to the big picture than getting lost in the leaves. All right, I want us to see the trees as much as we can. So you don't have to ask, what does a star mean? What does the fire mean? What do the scales on the dragon mean? Some of those maybe you should ask. Some of them you shouldn't. Okay, some of them just make the story better. some of them not. We'll talk about what people's ideas are on these things. All right, so that's 5. Symbols come from Old Testament and from the ancient Near East. All right, anything about that one? My voice is getting raw, so I just thought you might have something to say. I'm sure Josh.
So you're telling me the COVID vaccination is not the mark of the beast?
That is what I'm saying. Yep. If that's all you heard there, that's enough. Yep. Mhm.
Dang it.
And that doesn't say you should or shouldn't get the COVID. This is not a political statement. I'm just saying that doesn't have anything to do with the book of Revelation. Okay, you figure out yourself whether you should get vaccinated. I'll let you worry about that kind of stuff. All right. The 6th thing I want to say about this, I could have 100, okay, but I don't know, maybe it doesn't. 6th thing is, or sorry, am I on the 6th thing? Yeah, whatever number it is. The poetic and imaginative side of apocalyptic is supposed to evoke emotion. Okay, it's poetry and it's beautiful. Like, these are literary geniuses that are writing, or maybe just John. We can talk about that later too, right? One person, and he's really smart. He's playing with all these symbols and he's bringing them all together, and they are very cool. And they're supposed to make you like cry and get excited. Like, there's a time you should be reading this almost as a child sometimes. That makes this more fun. No, the dragon is chasing, he's chasing the woman and the child, and oh my goodness, the eagles are coming. This is great. Like, you're supposed to feel those kinds of things. The story is moving. There's a monster, he's coming up out of the sea. We should be scared, emotions evoked, right? It's supposed to be that kind of story. You're supposed to get excited. You're supposed to, I don't know if you're actually literally supposed to cry, but you're supposed to feel it. Right? It's a story. Enjoy the story that's going on there. Don't get so lost that you miss the big picture. So constantly remind me as we're going through this. If I start to go down too many levels, okay, bring us back. Here we are in chapter 5. What do we got? What's happening here? Okay, you could summarize Revelation in just a couple sentences, and then you could summarize it in a few paragraphs. But you could also write commentaries galore on it. Okay, I don't want to get lost in all that stuff. So I said this already, so this is my next point, making it all my actual points. It's a literature about crisis. Okay, it's going through crisis. The original audience is going through something that's super transformative. And this book is designed to give them hope. It's a book of hope. You're afraid of this book of encouragement? You're so missing it. Like, this is here, it's to give us hope. So in Revelation, the people of God are being killed under the emperors. Okay, and it's because they decided that they would pledge allegiance to a different Lord, a different ruler. Okay, and when you pledge allegiance to a different ruler, there's going to be some kind of separation. That's what Revelation is about. Which one are you going to pledge allegiance to? Okay, and this is going to become really relevant for conversations that we're having today. It's going to speak into that. I do think there's an ethical part here that I wanted to remind us of. I think John is writing to 7 churches, and for most of those churches, he's hoping that they'll clean up their act. He wants them to hear something. Cool, that 15 minutes. He wants them to hear something. Like, you're supposed to do something. It's a clear call to be set apart. Okay, holy, hagios or kadosh, right? To be separate. And this is a status that they're given, but it's also an urging to look a certain way after the status that you've been given. Okay, so it's not a call to be somewhere so you be acceptable. It's a call that says you have already been accepted. You're my people. Awesome job. I've set you apart. Now live like that. Live like Jesus. Live sacrificially, which is going to be the main point. 7, 8, 9, whatever number I'm on. Apocalyptic refers to their own time and the end times at the same time. Okay, something else that I've already said, but now I'm drilling down into it. Okay, so it's referring to their specific history, things that have already happened and that fit into the grand narrative of Scripture. There's one big story. This is the last book in it, but it's not the last book in the story, right? The story is still going 2,000 years later. This is the last one that we call inspired, but this story is going to fit into this long story that includes Genesis, includes the creation and the fall and this whole movement all the way along. So their own time and the end times are the same thing. Again, I've already said it, I'm just emphasizing it with a number now. Okay, all that other stuff was just made up as I was rambling on. So when Paul speaks of the end times, he means that time that was inaugurated when Christ came. Okay, so this is going to be important because time, everyone thinks about time when it comes to Revelation. So just give you a big picture here, right? We've got this Old Testament time, and then we've got the cross, okay, and then we've got this continuous time here. Okay, so things stop this age, and then the age to come. Right? So there's a sense in which this age will just keep right on going during this, but it's this new age, and one time eventually this will stop too, this age, and there'll be whatever this new age is. Okay, and that's what we all think of that the Revelation is talking about. Right? When the New Jerusalem comes down and God forever dwells with mankind, it's what's this? Okay, what is heaven like? What is all that stuff like? But it's not. It's telling you this story with language from this story. And often it's actually telling you this story as well. But there's a ton of times, like Jesus dies in the book of Revelation, a few different times actually, depending on how you read it, right? So it's telling you this story. The book of Revelation is telling you the story, and it will constantly, it will start telling you the story, and it'll come back on itself and tell you the story, and it'll come back, and it'll repeat the story, and it'll come back and repeat the story. You'll see it moves forward. We call that progressive parallelism or recapitulation. It's going to keep telling you a similar story in different ways. So for instance, you're going to have 7 trumpets, 7 bowls or vials. Remember all that? It's going to have 7 of what else?
Bowls.
Bowls. Got that one. Trumpets, bowls,
Scrolls.
scrolls. To include you in there. Okay. 7 of each of these things, but you're going to notice sometimes when it gets to the 7th one, it won't ever tell you what the 7th one is. Instead, it'll just start telling you what the next 7 are. It's almost like he's got, here's 7. Okay, here's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 and 6 are a little different. And then on the 7th one, he says, here's 7. Like, that's part of this recapitulation. And they're going back over, and they're going to tell you it's going to go a little bit further each time. I want you to watch for things like that. Okay, so their times and the end times are the same times. It's about their world and it's about another world. It's about a world of history, but a world behind that world that can only really be seen by those who have ears to hear or eyes to see. So you'll see that those words, see and hear. Like, are you listening? Can you really see? Can you see through the veil? Right? The scrim, is it thinned enough? Has it been unveiled for you to be able to see enough? So also read for the sake of faithful witness. Okay, that is, it is a call to you. Even though it's not written to you, it is for you. We're called to be faithful witnesses through speech, positive action. I would say non-participation in contemporary things that are happening sometimes, where we're going to say we will not join into this group because we've pledged allegiance to a different king. So it's going to call you to have sit-ins, right? Protests. I don't know what that'll look like. I don't know if you actually have to sit in, if you actually have to wave some banner, you have to wear a hat or anything like that. But you do have to say, I am not part of that anymore. It's going to be a call for us. It's going to be an ethical call. It's going to be an ideological call. Like, it's calling you something. So we're going to read it as if it might be telling us something at the same time. Let's see here. Is there anything in here that I need to say? I say it's not about the end of the world, but it's about Jesus as Lord, and this is what his kingdom looks like. God is on the throne, not Caesar. It's what Revelation will constantly tell us. Jesus is risen. He has the keys to death and Hades, And here's what's really going on if you can see into the back of the stage. If you can see through into this other world, here's what's really happening. I know it looks like all of this is on you and you're being tortured and this is miserable and all this is happening and you think it's just getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And Jesus says, but I want to show you something. Here's what's happening. That's what the revelation is. I want to unveil to you so you can see this incredible world in the midst of this hurting world as we live together in the already but the not yet. Right? The kingdom has already come, but we all know it's not fully come. Right? We're still working on it. We're still hoping for it to come in a bigger sense, like that is when the lion lays down with or the leopard lays down with the lamb, or when that paradisical vision is revealed, the beatific vision of the fruit trees everywhere and just oh, hallelujah, everything is great, and God has come to dwell in our midst. All of that stuff, it's real, it's full reality. So for those who have ears to hear, the true nature of things are found in this upside down nature of Christ's kingdom, which is a kingdom of love, not a kingdom of power over, but of power under. So it goes back to that original thing that I said right in the beginning. This is how to say it, the redemption of the nations and the arrival of the new creation are accomplished through the faithful, loving, and sacrificial lives of God's people. Okay, because of the sacrificial life of God's true human. So he's done this, and now we're called to do this, and it's this upside down world, right? Jesus, the King of the world, decides that he is going to give away his power, his life, his very life, and we're called to be sacrificial in the same way. All right, so there's some pretty big basics. Okay, tell me what else you would say needs to be introductory material, prolegomena. Anything prolegomena stuff that you want to throw in? This is definitely Dr. Dalrymple's moment if he wants to say it. Oh, he's gone. Never mind. He got bored. It's like, Jason, I've heard this stuff before. Party word, which one? Prolegomena? Yeah, okay. Introduction material. All right, come on. I know Travis has got something, Josh has got something. They're just waiting to give you guys a chance to talk because they know that they're always talking.
What's the traditional belief about the author and the scholarly consensus about the author?
Yeah, I'm going to save that for next week, but there's a couple of different. So his name is John, obviously. The question is, are we talking about John who wrote the book of John and the epistles of John? John is pretty normal name back then. So lots of people were named that, so we're not sure. But most people, most scholars, I think, even non-Christian scholars, I think generally assign this to the apostle who was the beloved of Christ. Most of them would say that that's who it is. Some people say the elder John is different than the apostle John. It could be. I don't know. But I see enough in this to convince me that if it's a different John, or it's not even John, but it's just pseudonymous, because by the way, almost all apocalyptic literature is pseudonymous. That is false right there. It says who it is, but it's not really written by the person who says it is. So you'll see like the book of Enoch, for instance, which is written 1,000 years after the person Enoch, if there was a person named Enoch lived, right? But it's put in his name, and everybody would recognize that. So it's possible that this book is put in the name of John, but not actually written by John. If that's the case, then at least what's happening is that person, I think, knows the book of John, the Gospel of John, really well. Because he is grabbing words and statements from that book like crazy. Right? He has a lot of the same key words. He writes in the same manner. You can tell how different people write. Not like their handwriting, but the way they sound. Right. So if you're reading my newsletters, like Dear Family, which I've written to all of my different churches, You can tell it's me writing versus one of the other pastors writing. Okay, John's pretty clear that he's stealing the way that that person is written. So, and dates are going to be important too. Did you ask that question?
No, that was gonna be my next one.
Sure.
But I'm not onto that one yet. So who's the other who? Who's it written to? And then we can do the when. So,
Who is it written to?
yeah, so author, but then who's it written to? And then when?
All this stuff is going to be next week, but yep.
Well, this is introductory stuff. You said, what are the introductory
Well,
questions?
we're always going to be doing introductory stuff, but yes. But I planned that for, this was the genre stuff.
Oh.
And then we'll talk about specific that, but the who is the 7 churches. So I think everybody agrees with that, but we just have to ask that question when we get to that in the text. Like, who are these 7 churches? So Thyatira, Smyrna, Ephesus, you can read them yourself. But are they real churches? Are they later churches? Is that a future thing? Is it people at that time? We'll talk about that. And the when is equally controversial. And I am not going to give a pre-answer to that. I'm going to keep asking that question throughout the book and see if you guys can determine it as we're going. That is, the real question will be, is this before the temple has been destroyed in 70 AD or after the temple has been destroyed in whatever, 90 AD? Okay, and there are certain things that'll lead you in different directions. Like how he talks about the temple would tell you something about whether it's been destroyed or not destroyed. Okay, if it had been just destroyed, you would expect him to say this, but he doesn't say that. But scholars are opposed as to what it is. And I don't remember what Rob's answer is. Hopefully he'll come back next week and tell us what he's pretty sure it is. But I'm sure he's changed his view in the last 20 years that I've known him too. All right, any others? Any questions about genre?
So genre, other genres would be like the epistles, the gospels, letters, things like that. So what is so special? And you can we spend the whole time going over this, but like, what are other types of genres that, since you just kind of talked about prophecy and apocalypse, but
Yeah,
so we can understand appreciate the difference or whatever.
yeah, that's good. And I didn't go into all those details because we just did like a 1-year class on hermeneutics. We did like, I don't even know, probably 50 different classes. I can't remember how many it was, 35, I think, different classes on, and speaking of genre. So, history is a genre where you're trying to give historical events. King lists is a genre where you're talking about certain kings and the way they list, or genealogy is a different genre than king list, but might be attached to it. One genre might be grocery list. Okay, I don't think it's a biblical genre that I'm aware of, but it could be considered a genre. It speaks in a very different way. It's just got a list with some parentheses maybe, or scribbles out and stuff like that. That's got its own genre. You're not supposed to read it as a story. Gospel is a very different thing than history, but it includes history, I think. But it's doing it from a certain perspective. It's trying to do something different. Wisdom literature, like Theodicy, the book of Job, is not a history book, I don't think. It's a book that's designed to ask you questions like, what happens? Why do these terrible things happen to people who love Jesus or love God? Okay, so it's defense for God. These are all different kinds of genres. Epistles, very didactic. Somebody's writing a letter to somebody. It's a different way of understanding something. Like Romans is not supposed to be a theology textbook. That's not what it's written for. You've got to read it as a letter to the people of Rome in order to understand what's happening there. Okay, you almost have to read it backward. You have to start at the end to understand where he's going so that you can read those other theological points to see where he's headed. Okay, that's how epistles work. Song of Songs is a completely weird ancient Near Eastern erotic love story. Okay, it's not chronological, just like the book of Daniel is not chronological. You read Daniel as being something that's historical, but you're missing it if you're reading it that way. It's not that it doesn't have history in it, but it's not meant to be in order. By the way, the book of Revelation is not in order. It's very clearly not in order. We've already talked about the recapitulation that happens. Okay, Daniel's not in order because if you look at the kings from chapter 6, 7, 8, 9, you're going to find that certain kings all of a sudden are back on the throne again after they've already died. Okay, that's a pretty clear scene. They didn't come back for life. No, there's something going on here. There's a literary move, a chiasm. Revelation has these kinds of things. Song of Songs is very clearly chiastic structure. That middle piece is more important than the edge pieces.
It's interesting that you're talking about structure because the end of this book, there's it talks about the tree of life, talks about there will no longer be anything accursed. So it's like the undoing, it's an inclusio. It's like it's it's wrapping up the whole Bible. It's like it's this beautiful ending.
Yeah.
But it's reiterating the beginning too. It's like this, it's genius.
It is.
Absolutely. I love you guys. I gotta go. Jace, you're amazing, dude.
Thanks. Yeah. Yeah. Josh just he used the word inclusio, right? It's a bookend. It ends the story. So it's all a return to Eden. But Eden is expanded in a new way. The 144,000, the great temple, all that stuff is changed, but it looks just like it in the same, or it looks similar enough that you're going to see it. It's just expanded. No longer is that just one tree, but it's a tree on both sides, one tree on each side of the river, and with 12 different fruit, like that's feeding for the nations. Like it's this symbolism that's been there, but it's expanding, it's blowing up. Right? It's no longer a temple that's this big, but now it's this big. It's covered up the entire world. So those are all literary devices. So that's some of the different kinds of genre. Apocalyptic is different because it's pseudonymous, because it has an angel that comes and delivers it usually, because it's a vision. We'll talk about that word when we get to next week. The vision of John. Is this something that he really saw, or is this something he's just writing? Okay, those are the kinds of things we want to talk about, but I'm pretty sure we're out of time, right? Yep, 9:17. 1 hour and 15 minutes. I try and be very as close to that as I can. Some of you like to hang out afterwards. You are welcome. I'm usually worn out, but usually there's some sort of vigorous debate that goes way deeper than what we're talking about here that I don't share with the rest of you. So it's just for the inner group, and I get tired after about 10 minutes and go home. But good to see all of you, and the people that I didn't say hi to that came on later, Lori, Karen, Brad, Kathy, didn't see you guys at the beginning. Nice to have you guys. And the rest of you stuck with us the whole way. Amazing. Good job. Thanks for coming. Next week, we're going to start walking through it slowly. See you guys later.